I support that 100%.
Would he be a murderer?
No.
Would I be a murderer?
No.
Even though it's because of revenge, I would not be a murderer because that was part of your criteria.
Yeah, but I hate to tell you, that is not simply revenge. That is protecting the innocent from being slaughtered.
I understand that. I'm talking about my own internal motivation is primarily revenge for what he did to Jewish people, not necessarily like, you know, a moral escapade to save the world.
Right.
Would it be murder?
And exactly why God created me for a purpose, I don't know. See, God didn't ask me to be his consultant.
So you don't know the purpose of your purpose, but you know you have a purpose.
No, I don't know why God created me for a purpose. I thought that was your question.
Yeah, you believe you have an inherent purpose, but you don't know what the purpose of having an inherent purpose is.
Well, that's not the way I would put it, but
I think it makes sense. Is that just a yes or no question? You think you have a purpose, but you're not really sure why you have that purpose.
no, I am sure why I have that purpose, because God created me for that purpose.
All right, but you don't know why God created you for that purpose.
I don't know what went on in the mind of God in eternity past.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't understand that. In other words, I don't understand why God gave me the gift of life. I don't know why there's a cliff.
I think that was your parents. All right, then why don't you believe in alternative prophets like maybe Muhammad, who has his own historical evidence?
I am convinced that Muhammad was an historical person. The evidence is Muhammad really was born and really died and really lived and taught and fought. Now, the reason that I don't trust Muhammad is because when I read the Quran, I see internal contradictions. Like, Jesus is not God, but I respect Jesus. He's a good teacher. Obviously, Muhammad was born about 500 years after Christ, which means Muhammad never met Jesus. But the eyewitnesses who saw Jesus insisted Jesus claimed to be God. So who am I going to trust to be my primary source about an historical person? A dude who lived 500 years after the guy? Or the eyewitnesses? It's a no-brainer.
Who are the eyewitnesses?
Matthew, John.
Stop you right there. All the books of the Bible were written sometime after Jesus died. So what eyewitnesses are you talking about?
Matthew, John, Peter.
How can they be eyewitnesses if the Bible was written sometime after Jesus died, like hundreds of years?
Oh.
Yes.
Well, obviously, every history is written some time after the events.
Yeah, but
right? If the history was written before the events, then we'd have a real problem.
Fair enough, but I like to think eyewitness means you were there at that time.
You were there.
I mean, it's hard to be an eyewitness 300 years after something happened.
It sure is.
Unless you have a DeLorean, but that's a different topic.
A great point. Sir, it used to be taught on every major university campus here in the United States that the Gospels were not written until 200, 300, 400 years after the fact. One manuscript find smashed that whole school of thought. It's located in the John Rylands Museum in Manchester, England. It's a fragment of the Gospel of John, dated between 105 and 130 AD. Secondly, that whole school of thought was smashed by the letters of Clement, Bishop of Rome, Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, in 95 AD and in 115 AD, in which they quote all of the Gospels, all of Paul's letters. So obviously this whole school of thought that taught the Gospels were not written, the New Testament was not written for 300 to 400 years after the fact, has been totally discredited by the manuscript finds.
Is documents written only 100 or so years after Jesus' death, as per what you just told me, like 95 AD and 103 AD, right? So it's not hundreds of years, it's just 100 years, is what you're telling me, right?
No. When you study Paul's writings, and when he wrote them, he died in 62 AD approximately, you begin to realize that Galatians, 1 Corinthians, were written in late 40s, early 50s. So that is 20 to 30 years after the fact. 20 to 30 years after Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, Paul writes Galatians, 1 Corinthians.
Okay, so eyewitness event would be 30 years after the event, correct?
Yes.
See, I feel like that's problematic because what you just told me with your, whole balloon and all this, that, and the other, that eyewitnesses have to be there, and histories aren't written after. But 30 years seem to be, if I try to recount, I was not alive 30 years ago, but I'm not sure how great your memory is. But if you try to write a recount in a book over one event that happened 30 years in your past, I feel like that's not eyewitness.
I can do it.
Okay, fine.
And if, like, you know, the whole God thing was that important, maybe you should write it maybe not 30 years after.
Okay.
Just like,
Now, when you study the first century Christian church,
yeah.
they were not impressed with writing. They were leaning on the oral presentation of the history by the eyewitnesses. And so the first church meetings in late 30s, 40s, and 50s AD were not gatherings where they read a book. They were gatherings where an eyewitness who had seen Jesus shared what she or he had seen and heard. Then, as these eyewitnesses began to die off, suddenly it became rather clear we need to write this stuff down. And so they wrote down what they had seen and what they had heard.
Alright, so just to be clear, like, you believe all the stuff that happened with Jesus because after Jesus died, and people have all these, like, eyewitness and oral, you know, ways of communicating. 30 years after that, eyewitnesses, and 30 years after that, people wrote a few things about it, and then 100 years after that, more people wrote anything about that, and 2,000 years later, we're here, and you're telling me you believe that all these things happen, like, in regards to Jesus Christ, based on historical evidence that seems to be, I don't know, I wouldn't want to defend that in court.
Well, obviously in court, an eyewitness can put you in jail. Not only that, an eyewitness account in court can get you in the electric chair, executed. So remember, eyewitness accounts are very, very important. Very important. And the overwhelming evidence is that these eyewitnesses who claim to have seen Christ die on a cross, buried in the tomb, a very specific tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, 3 days later, they saw him risen from the dead. They were willing to die for what they claimed to have seen.
A lot of people are willing to die for things they believe in.
Believe in, yes, but not claim to have seen. Because these guys are claiming to have seen Christ, not just simply to believe in him. But they're saying, we saw Jesus risen from the dead, and they were willing to be martyred for them. Sir, martyrs and hypocrites are not made of the same stuff.
I disagree.
You think people will die to cover up what they know to be alive?
People would, or I don't know if you, once again, it's like oral presentation in history from 2,000 years ago, so I'm not sure what these eyewitnesses actually said. I mean, doesn't the Bible in and of itself have several accountings of when Jesus rose? Maybe there's two angels one time, there's one angel when it was the boulder which originally moved, or are there not multiple interpretations of that in the Bible?
Well, I'm going to talk to my wife tonight on the phone. And if I, during the conversation, say I spoke to a gentleman about the evidence for the reliability of the New Testament, and later on in the conversation I say I spoke to over 500 people this afternoon, it's not a contradiction. I spoke to one man at one point, and I also spoke to over 500 people. So just because one gospel says there was an angel in an empty tomb, and another gospel says there were two angels in an empty tomb, is not a contradiction. We would have a contradiction if one of the gospels said there was only one angel at the empty tomb, and then another gospel said there were two angels.
So just to be clear, what you're saying is that because one gospel just forgot to mention another angel being there, and they only said one, that doesn't mean that there was actually two. That person just has a bad recounting of things that happened?
No. What I'm saying is, when you read, now listen, just let me answer you, and then you go on to the next one. When you look at CNN, Reuters, and the New York Times record a specific event, they are not going to be identical. You're going to have some common details, and you will have some divergent details. But there are not going to be blatant contradictions. And one of the ways that you tell whether an account is true is by looking at the different accounts and seeing, are there common details plus divergent details? If there are no divergent details, you know they were copying off each other. If there are too many divergent details and they contradict each other, then you know somebody's wrong. But what is so fascinating about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is they have common details. Do they diverge in certain ways? Absolutely yes. The same way CNN, Reuters, and the New York Times will have divergent details of the storm in the Philippines.
Okay,
all right.
Let me try this as well. So if we're looking at a news report by CNN, and you consider something, or I guess CNN 2,000 years ago fundamentally, that the absence of one angel is somehow a small detail and not very important to the story, that's problematic. Angels are not details that can simply be left out. I'm to believe what you probably feel about the significance of angels on Earth. This is problematic. This is not the equivalent of a few details. These are the equivalent of CNN saying we're in war in one country and Fox News saying we're like at war in the North Pole. These are highly divergent things that seem to be really important. These are not details, sir. These are important things.
I will let everybody make their own decision on that one.
Okay.
I think that one's crystal clear.
Me too.
We disagree.
All right, just one more question on the, I believe earlier we were talking about moral absolutism or things of this sort, and you were like, there are certain situations where you can't be moral absolutist. Do those not contradict, or?
If there is no God, there are no moral absolutes. Because if there is no God, morality comes from the human mind. And my human mind is not superior to your mind. So if you say one thing is good and I say it's evil, you're not right, I'm not wrong, I'm not right, you're not wrong. It's all relative.
30 years on me, apparently. But fair enough. Are there exemptions to things like the Ten Commandments? Can you kill somebody sometimes? Is it okay to kill Hitler?
Okay, great question. Yes, the Ten Commandments are moral absolutes. But do those moral absolutes apply in the same way to every situation?
I'm asking you that. Yeah,
right.
That's my question.
That's the question. Okay, good. I just want to clarify, make sure we're on the same page. All right. I feel that some followers of Christ have misunderstood the commandment, you shall not kill. I am convinced from both the Hebrew word and the context that that is referring to murder. I would define murder as killing motivated by selfishness, hatred, revenge.
Wait, so if you kill somebody not outside those three things, it's not murder anymore?
Okay, I'm gonna show you how. If you and I go into McDonald's.
Can I just have those three categories one more time?
You bet. Murder is killing motivated by selfishness, hatred, revenge. But if you and I go into McDonald's restaurant and a guy walks in with a gun and starts blowing people away, if you hit him high and I hit him low and we break his neck in the process, I would argue that is not murder. That is killing motivated by a drive to protect the innocent from being slaughtered. Ethically different from murder.
So, let's say if I was in a time period where I wanted to kill Hitler, and obviously I want to kill him for a few reasons because he's a bad guy, all this and that. I mean, let's see, wouldn't like revenge for what he did to the Jews would this not be revenge? I mean, he's gassing Jews, I don't want to kill him because of that. Would I be a murderer and would I go to Fireland for the rest of my life? Or?
Great question. One of my heroes tried to assassinate Adolf Hitler. His name, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was deeply committed to Christ. He was a pastor in the German church. He began to watch what Hitler was doing. He became convinced, I am ethically responsible to stop Hitler from slaughtering innocent people. I have the utmost respect for the way Dietrich Bonhoeffer tried to physically stop Adolf Hitler right in his tracks by trying to assassinate him. I support that 100%.
Would he be a murderer?
No.
Would I be a murderer?
No.
Even though it's because of revenge, I would not be a murderer because that was part of your criteria.
Yeah, but I hate to tell you, that is not simply revenge. That is protecting the innocent from being slaughtered.
I understand that. I'm talking about my own internal motivation is primarily revenge for what he did to Jewish people, not necessarily like, a moral escapade to save the world.
Right.
Would it be murder, even though I'm still killing the same person
Yeah,
you would probably kill?
If you're filled with hatred toward a human being,
I could
that's
possibly
sinful.
go to hell for killing Hitler, depending on how I feel inside.
Your motive. Correct. When you read the Sermon on the Mount, what you begin to understand is God attaches a great deal of importance to motive. So it's not just me murdering somebody that's wrong, it's me hating somebody. See, if I hate you, if I never murder you, but if I hate you, I am guilty of sin. If I never date rape, but I do lust, I am demeaning a woman in my mind. That is sin, according to Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. So you see, God created you and me to really love each other, to really respect each other, and not to play mind games with each other, manipulate each other, and use each other.
To be clear, like the moral absolutism of the Ten Commandments that says thou shalt not murder is only in the sense, like, for the most part, it seems to me like the moral absolutism of the Ten Commandments seem to conflict if God is basing things on a question of motives, right? So is it moral absolute? Is it absolute? Because you say it depends on the circumstance, it depends on how I feel, and that seems to be contradictory to what you said earlier.
All right, it's real simple. In the Ten Commandments we read, you shall not murder. What is that? That is a guardrail that God is putting in place. God is not content with me simply not murdering you. God has created me to love you and to respect you. Now, if I get so mixed up in my thinking that I consider murdering you, God is putting a stake in the ground saying, Cliff, never murder Emil. But I can promise you, God has a far higher goal for me in my relationship with you than simply not murdering you. He wants me to respect you, to love you, to encourage you.
You did not murder me. Thank you for that. All right, so let me just kind of be clear, right? So the moral absolutism of the Ten Commandments is relative to motives.
No, it's not relative to motives. It is based on an understanding that the human heart is what needs to change. And the human heart, changed by Christ, is going to be a heart that loves and respects.
Okay,
now,
so
if any of us get so confused that we consider adultery, murder, lying, watch out. That's a guardrail, and God says, no, don't go over that guardrail.
Okay, well, in that case, let's take a simpler instance, like the thou shalt not bear false witness.
Yes.
Seems pretty standard. Is it bear false witness based on motives, or always never bear a false witness?
Well, that's where followers of Christ disagree. Some followers of Christ would say, I am not responsible to tell you the truth if by giving you the truth, you're going to be able then to go out and murder people.
Well, let's not just say murder.
So that's where...
that's an easy standard to abide by, right? Just don't lie because of murder. Are there any other standards that in situations where I can lie, that's not about like stopping someone from murdering anyone?
Okay.
I'd like to know...
I do not know. Why? Because I'm not the judge. God is. And God is all-knowing, and I'm not all-knowing.
You seem to know why in regards to murder. Is it just not outlined? Did Jesus
Correct.
really
It's
get
not
all
outlined.
into depth about the whole lying thing?
Right. That's exactly right. We are not to lie, we're to speak the truth. But, and although I will stick to that in a very strong way, I understand why certain followers of Christ who are sincere and really seek to honor Christ say, wait a second, Cliff, if this criminal is asking for information, and if you give them that information, you know exactly what they're going to do. They're going to rape and murder people. They do not deserve to get the truth from you. I understand their point.
Okay, so, I mean, for the most part, like, I guess the other commandments, or particularly lying, Jesus doesn't, like, talk about it all that much.
Correct.
Okay, that's kind of unfortunate. Yeah, you know,
No, wait a second. But here's why I think it's not unfortunate. You see, the point of Christianity is not, here are the rules, Emil, follow them. The point of Christianity is, I am God who loves you. I've become a man in Jesus. That's how personal I am. I want to personally connect with you to live in a spiritual relationship with you. So Christianity is not just getting all the rules right. Christianity is knowing God, knowing Christ. That's why faith is so important. Faith is not, hey God, I think you exist. That's not what God is concerned about. God is concerned about, God, I want to live in relationship with you. And that's what heaven will be, an eternal love relationship with a living God.
I mean, I probably won't find out, but in any circumstance, I do have other things to do. It's actually really interesting.
Good to meet you, Emil. Thanks for raising all the issues you did.
My human 18-year-old hormonal understanding of the word love does not line up with the God that says, for the 18-year-old that died and committed 3 sins in his whole life, and other than that was a meditating Buddhist monk and did perfectly fine by societal standings and didn't contradict things of the Bible, let's say. That was a bad example. But sending him to hell for eternity for these 18 finite years, I can see how you can argue that as justice because that man still did something wrong in his 18 finite years. But I do not see how the word loving is appropriate. Now, I do understand you said earlier that for love to be real, it has to be free love. Absolutely. So if God's like, I don't care if you rejected me, I'm going to send you to heaven anyway. I can understand, I can get behind how that's not loving. But to say at the point of death,
Right.
this 18-year-old man has to spend eternity in hell, and even if he's in hell for, say, 3,000 years, and then realizes that he genuinely messed up and genuinely pleads from the depth of hell, if there is width and depth to hell, that he recognizes his mistakes and he wants to atone for his sins, he cries out for Jesus, he accepts Jesus in a very real way that I have in my life. So same thing happens in the next life. So how is it a loving God to say, no?
Okay.
Period.
Good question. Now, this woman over here is my sister-in-law. In other words, I'm married to her sister, Sharon. Now, if I bring Sharon with me to Austin, she's horribly murdered. The murderer is caught. I go to court. The evidence clearly shows that the murderer murdered my wife, Sharon. After all the evidence has been presented, the judge looks the guy in the face and says, "It's obvious that you murdered Sharon Knechtle. You're free to leave." I would get out of the state of Texas as fast as my feet could carry me. Why? Because justice would be an absolute farce in the state of Texas. You see, unfortunately, God is not evil, he's good. But because he's good, he has to guarantee that justice triumphs. Otherwise, he's not good. And I would argue that's part of love. If you really love, you are committed to the well-being of people, which means you are committed to injustice losing, not winning.
Okay.
So that's why there's a hell, because God is just. Another quick example. Yeah, but you got to understand, Cliff, God is just loving. And so if God is loving, we're all going to heaven. And this whole idea of punishment, this whole idea of a cross, I mean, come on, that's so barbaric. It's so antiquated. Wait a second. You and I are in kindergarten. We're in the sandbox. I kick sand in your face. The teacher comes out, says, "Cliff, don't kick sand in this guy's face." I slap the teacher in the face. Teacher takes me inside now, brings the principal in. Principal says, "You don't slap the teacher and you don't kick sand in that kid's face." I slap the principal. So all of a sudden the police officer walks in. "Come on, Cliff, you're coming with me." I'll haul back and punch the police officer. I'm going to prison. I get out of prison, but I still got this habit of not liking authority. So I go to see the president. And while with the president, I haul back and smack him. Well, the Secret Service are all over me and I'm getting executed. Okay, now, why am I getting executed, killed by the Secret Service for hitting the president and not for kicking sand in your face? Not because you're less valuable than the president, but when I attack you in our society where justice is being maintained, it's different from me attacking the president. And the penalty is going to be severer. So similarly, when I rebel against God, the creator of the universe, the penalty is going to be very serious. And Jesus described that serious penalty as hell.
Okay, so
Does that make any sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. So I would go back to the time of that the Old Testament was written. There was cultures where the law would be like, let's say I killed Sharon. I promise you I won't.
Right.
But let's say I killed
Thank you.
Sharon. In some tribes, in some cultures, it would be acceptable for you not only to kill me, to kill my wife,
Yep.
but to kill me and my family.
Yes.
And so there's this new law that's introduced in the Bible that says, whoa, 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 an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So that's not supposed to be looked at, and it wouldn't be looked at by the people who read the Bible at the time at this barbaric, no, you can't do life for life sort of thing. It's looked at as like, okay, so he wronged me. It's not right for me to wrong him more than he wronged me, sort of thing. So it's wait. So, as I'm one of those weird guys that believe that God, not physically, but through his people and through his prophets and whatnot, and through the prophet scribes, wrote the Bible. So I believe that's God's law, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, or you can even go as far as to say life for a life. So how is it in this case? I'm not trying to belittle your other arguments; they were like perfectly sound. But in this instance, if we have this God who says eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, let's belittle it down to 13. And I'm using 13 because there's this age of accountability that's 12. I don't necessarily believe.
Right, I understand.
Okay, so let's say the bare minimum
Yep.
age that is required
Right.
for God to judge as like an independent person, like not relying on, oh, they're a kid, I'm going to judge him differently. So whatever the minimum of that is, let's say it's 1 year. So
Right.
from 12 to 13.
Right.
So God, using this mentality of eye for eye, tooth for tooth, will send that 13-year-old to literally infinity in hell because of the very finite sin that he created on this earth. I don't see that as eye for eye, tooth for tooth. And I understand he's
Right.
the president and the guy that I killed as a 13-year-old's me in the sandbox. So I get that, how that's different. But how is that not contrary, at least? Not contradictory, but at least contrary.
Okay. I am not deserving hell because I lusted. I'm not deserving hell because I was selfish. I don't deserve hell just because I was once greedy. I deserve hell because behind my lust, behind my greed, behind my hatred is, get out of here, God. Right here, I'll do it. I'll do it my way. I could give a rip about you, God. I'm the center of the universe. I'll do it my way. In other words, I think C.S. Lewis was right in Mere Christianity when he entitles the great sin pride.
Right.
So, if I'm going to be totally self-centered and do it my way, God says, you can do it your way for eternity. That's what hell will be. Me doing it my way for eternity. So no one's going to hell because 3 times they blew it in life.
Right.
No. No. People go to hell because they make a decision all life long, I'm going to do it my way. And on the day of judgment, God's not going to look them in the face and say, guess what, son? For the rest of eternity, you're going to do it my way. No. He says it's your choice. You want to do it your way? You can do it your way for eternity. That's hell.
Okay, so I don't know if I asked this already, but so let's say that sometime in the afterlife, and again, I'm not implying universalism. I'm not trying to imply that everyone will go to hell. I recognize, or everyone will go to heaven. I recognize that it has to be our choice in this life primarily. But let's say somehow that in the afterlife, we could repent and gain salvation. Let's just say, would that system of hell necessarily imply the breakdown of God's system and love and justice and belittle the whole entire Bible and make everything useless? And of course, I over-exaggerated it.
Right, I understand. Okay. You know what really gets my jets going in a wrong way is when someone says, oh, Cliff, you believe there's a heaven because you're just scared to die. That really grates on me. No, I don't believe there's a heaven just because I'm scared to die. I don't believe there's a heaven because I've been there either. There's one reason I believe there's a heaven. It's because Jesus Christ promised heaven to all who trust in him, and I have seen that the evidence is Jesus does not lie. But I can't empirically prove heaven.
Right.
All right, I've never been there. I've never seen anybody rise from the dead, so I can't prove that there's a heaven. There's one reason I believe there's a heaven, because Jesus promised it, and the evidence is he didn't blow smoke. He spoke the truth. Now, it's therefore incumbent upon me to say, okay, Lord Jesus, how do I get to heaven? Because you're my primary source of information about heaven. I don't have an eyewitness account of heaven. So, if Jesus in the Bible seemed to communicate that death is final, and that death is a time that after which I experience judgment, and then it's either heaven or hell, and there's no crossing back and forth, I can't change it, because I'm not the authority.
But I mean, like, the whole entire nature of the Bible is huge progressive change. And of course, the change that comes with Christ is prophesized, and it is in plan to beginning. But like, I don't see it against God's nature to start off by saying, you know, don't eat the apple. If you eat the apple or fruit or whatever, you're banned from the Garden of Eden. They eat the apple. He doesn't say, well, we eat the apple, that's fine. Oh no, he says, all right, so over the next 1,000 years, you're gonna go into exile, all this stuff. I'm gonna create this law. If you follow this law, you will be considered holy. You'll be golden. They then again mess that up. So God doesn't say, well, you messed up the law, that's it. cut off period. That's the end of it. He says, okay, you know what? Actually, from this beginning, I had this back pocket idea of Jesus. So now we are into this crazy new progressive set of laws. Laws isn't even the right word. But now we have another way to not mess up. So it's okay if we eat the fruit. It's okay if we don't completely fulfill the 612 whatever laws in Deuteronomy. It's okay if we break 1 or 9 or 10 or 8 of the 10 commandments. Now we have this new thing that he's implementing called Jesus. And if we find salvation, or if we accept salvation through him, golden. So I don't find it totally against God's nature to say, you know, Jesus is the only way, and then, you know, 3,000 years into hell, if I'm legitimately spent the last 2,999.9 years crying out for God's mercy over and over again, and in the contriteness of my heart, self-circumcised my heart and said, God, I messed up, I recognize this, I'm truly sorry, not just so I can escape this hell, but so that I can truly live the life in eternity that you originally created me to live. I don't see how it would be specifically and necessarily against God's nature to provide something in the afterlife. Does that make sense?
Sure. But the only way I know about heaven, the only way I know about hell, is because of what Jesus revealed. Not only that, I have to disagree with the idea that anybody's going to be in heaven because they followed the Old Testament law. Abraham's not going to be in heaven because he was a great guy. Just talk to Sarah. Abraham had some deep problems. Jacob was a cheater par excellence. Rahab was a prostitute. It's because of their faith in God that they're going to be in heaven, not because they followed some law. None of us follow the moral law perfectly. All of us are sinners.
There was I don't want to use the word clause, but there were clauses in there that would, there was ways that they would atone for their sin. Symbolically,
the sacrificial lamb, the scapegoat, right?
And the day of atonement. And of course, that's symbolic of their faith. Absolutely, don't get me wrong.
It's pointing right to Christ. You know, John the Baptist says, here's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world.
Right.
Fulfilling that whole symbolic sacrificial system.
But the way of atonement, although still in the same faith that Abraham and all these people were atoned by, although still faith, is in a way different than Jesus, or maybe not, but I think it is, because I see, like, I don't have to participate in the Day of Atonement every year. I don't, because I have Christ now.
Exactly. Christ is the fulfillment of the Day of Atonement. He made atonement for sin. Exactly.
Yeah, so I still see this change, because at one point there was Day of Atonement, sacrificial lamb and all this, and then one day there's Jesus, and then so like a person who lives back here has to go by the Day of Atonement. And of course it's symbolic of their faith in God, which points to Christ still. And then people who live after Christ, we don't have to do atonement. We can just be atoned by Christ and by his death and resurrection.
That's right.
And through that faith that is symbolic of Jesus and God, that's how we're saved.
Correct.
So how about in the next life, why would it be totally contradicting God's love to say, well, if we have that same faith, even though we messed up, even though we didn't believe in God, even though we didn't do the Day of Atonement because we weren't perfect, because we ate the apple, and so on, how come if we have this same faith mentality and have this same contriteness of the heart sometime between our death and the end of eternity, of course there's not an end of eternity, how come it would break down all of what we believe in the Bible for God to say, you know what, I love you so much that I'm going to go beyond just saying death is death, period. Because the very nature of Christ, death is not death. Like, I don't get that at all. I know what verse you're talking about.
Okay.
And I get what it's trying to say, but the whole nature of God's restoration of mankind due to the fall of man, I think it goes beyond just death. I don't think at one point God says, well, I saved a good lot of people, but it's their choice. They don't want to be saved. That's fine. I don't see God as someone who will say, you will never, ever, ever, for all eternity, get a chance to spend eternity with me just because of the things you did and didn't do in these 18 finite years. I'm not saying we won't be held accountable for our sins. I'm not saying hell isn't real. I'm not saying people won't go to hell for eternity. But I just don't see how it would, necessarily imply God's not loving if sometime in the afterlife, sometime in the
you want a
eternity,
second chance after death.
Right.
You bet. All right. And all I can say is, as I've repeatedly said, The only way that I know
I'm out of my box, I'm sorry.
about heaven and hell is because that's what Jesus revealed. And he did not talk about a chance after death. He seemed to communicate pretty clearly that death is the end of our chance. So we've gone over and over that. I think we beat that dead horse real dead, okay? So I want to tell you a true story that hopefully, because I don't want to be too direct with you, all right? So I'm going to try and be more subtle. So I'm going to tell you this story, but I think it applies to you. I have a younger brother who went to Princeton. And at Princeton, his Ivy League classmates used to stay up late into the night, firing one difficult intellectual question at him after another. Around about midnight, my brother would turn to his Princeton classmates and say, gentlemen, if these intellectual questions are keeping you from Christ, we'll pull an all-nighter. But if the real issue is, I want to have sex outside of marriage, I have to cheat on my exam because the pressure to get into med school is intense, then let's face that fact, gentlemen, so we can get some sleep tonight. Every single time, my brother's Princeton classmates would turn to him and say, Stuart, you're correct. I reject Christ, not because I've studied the issue so deeply and thought it through, realizing it's wrong, and then I have followed some option that has irrefutable evidence that it's superior to Christ. No way. What you say is correct. I want to do my thing, my way, and I don't want any God interfering. And so Stuart would look at his Princeton classmates and say, gentlemen, that's the only reason people go to hell. We don't have to pull an all-nighter. Have a good night. See, too frequently, sir, I'm afraid that is the real issue. It's an ethical, moral issue. And I respect you for the way you tipped me off to that earlier when you talked about...
Say ticked or tipped?
Tipped.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Oh,
No, you have not ticked me. It has been an absolute honor and delight to talk with you, okay?
Atheist at the same level of sinning as murdering and kidnapping? Because that's
Okay.
what you seem to be insinuating.
Good. In one sense, yes. In another sense, no. All right. I work with guys in prison who've raped. I have never raped. Okay, in a sense, I have not done as much evil as they have. But I have done evil in my lust. So both my lust and the act of rape equally separate us from God, because God is morally perfect. Now, am I ethically progressed beyond the rapist? Yes, I have. I work with murderers. Have I ever murdered? No. Have I hated? Yes, ma'am. My hatred separates me from God the same way their murder separates them from God. That's why we both need Christ.